Evidences of Atlantis. By Jorge Gudiño. Some dates indicated are relative. Researchers peg them at hundreds of thousands of years and others at only a few tens of thousands of years. However, they are much more remote than those currently established by archaeologists. Astrological eras: Virgo, from the year -13,108 to -10,948. Atlantean subraces: Aryans, Poseidonis. Leo, from the year -10,948 to -8,788. Ancient pre-dynastic Egypt, Sphinx. Cancer, from the year -8,788 to -6,628. Matriarchy, sedentary lifestyle, India. Gemini, from the year -6,628 to -4,468. Communication, languages, return to Egypt, Mesopotamia. Taurus, from the year -4,468 to -2,308. Minoan times in Crete. Apis Sormento. Aries, from the year -2,308 to 148. Amon-Ra's Ram. Empire, Rome. Pisces, from the year 148 to 2012. Mysticism, sacrifice, monotheism. Aquarius, from the year 2012 to 4172. Air, spirituality.
Evidences of Atlantis. Marine. The data provided by the soundings of the sea. Land animals and plants. The distribution of fauna and flora. Ethnographic. The similarities of language and ethnographic type. Architectural. The similarity of architecture, beliefs, and religious rites. Testimonial. The testimony of the ancient writers, of the ancient traditions of the races and of the archaic legends about the Deluge. History of humanity. The first race, white. It occurred in the Miocene Age, approximately 800,000 years ago. The second race, yellow. It happened about 200,000 years ago. The third race, black. Occurred 80,000 years ago. It was very large. All that was left of the Atlantean continent was destroyed, except for the island of Poseidonis. The fourth race, red, copper. And last great catastrophe, Poseidonis submerged, 9,564 years before our era. First human races. Before the Atlanteans, there were other races, which gradually disappeared. The remains of the last Lemurian subrace prospered in the development of the new Atlantean race, in 4 different places on Earth. The Atlantean race was practically the first whose body was fully developed. The first Atlantean migrations were from the Mongols to the Trans-Siberian part. The second were the Olmecs to America. And finally, the Aryans in Northern Europe, among others. Atlantean subraces. Atlantis flourished 2 million years ago. The first subrace, called the Rmohals. He developed the instinctive mind, the bladder, and the genital organs. The second subrace, of the Tlavatlis, developed memory. The third subrace, of the Toltecs, developed the rational mind. The fourth, of the Turanians. He perfected the physical body by exercise and war. The fifth, of the Semites. It was physically the most perfect of the Atlantean subraces. From her derived the fifth root race, Arya. In the sixth, of the Akkadians. The astral body was perfectly unified with the physical body. The seventh, of the Mongols, marked the degeneration of the Atlanteans. In it they gradually lost their great psychic and astral forces, so that man could transform into a purely human being. Great universal cataclysms. First, from abroad. 66 million years. Tertiary Cretaceous extinction. An asteroid crashed in Yucatan, Mexico. Second, earthquake. 850,000 years ago. The entire northern part of Atlantis sank. Third, earthquake. 220,000 years ago. Divided Atlantis into 2 continents, Ruta and Diatia. Between 12,800 and 10,640 years ago there were strong floods that wiped out Poseidonis, the last island of Atlantis. Sinking of Atlantis. Throughout history, various myths and legends have been narrated, many that have been transmitted for thousands of years orally and others in paintings and stone engravings. In the ancient epic of Gilgamesh of Persia, the prophecies of the king of Uruk are narrated, about the sinking of Atlantis. Universal Deluge and sacred texts. Other well-known texts among Christians and Muslims, in the Bible and the Quran, we also find the story of the prophet Noah, who left Atlantis, in a large ship that rescued hundreds of animal species and moved them to the east, then of a great deluge. Deluge painted in the Sistine Chapel of the Vatican. Flood in Egypt. It is difficult to determine the exact year of the flood. In the past, over tens of thousands of years, sea levels have fluctuated by more than 120 meters as large ice sheets have grown and receded during glacial cycles, according to marine and atmospheric research. The pyramids may have been submerged during the last flood, losing its white coating. The Palace of Captivation, Atlantis. The palace was said to be the largest and most beautiful building in all of Atlantis. It was built with white marble and adorned with precious gems. The Captivation Palace was the center of all social and political activity in Atlantis.
Emis House, inspired by ancient temples by Frank Lloyd. Christina House, Atlantean-style, by Frank Lloyd. The legendary city of Atlantis is believed to have had a giant golden statue of Poseidon. The statue was so large that it was visible from anywhere on the island. The golden statue of Poseidon was one of the most sacred objects in all of Atlantis. The Crystal Palace was the most beautiful building in all of Atlantis. It was made entirely of glass, with transparent walls and ceiling. It was the home of the king and queen of Atlantis, site of many important political meetings and social gatherings. Allegorical painting to the capital of Atlantis. In honor of the giant Atlas, the entire island was called Atlantis and the sea that surrounded it, Atlantic. Favored by Poseidon, the island of Atlantis was abundant in resources. There were all kinds of minerals, highlighting the orichalcum, mountain copper, more valuable than gold for the Atlanteans and with religious uses. It is speculated that the story refers to a natural alloy of copper with gold. There were also great forests that provided unlimited wood, numerous animals, domestic and wild, especially elephants, copious and varied foods from the earth. Architecture. In their constructions, the pillars that supported the roof were usually square and rarely cylindrical. Atlantean migrations. The Turanians, they were driven by the colonizing spirit from their earliest days and responded to it on a large scale. The Semites and the Akkadians, they were also colonizing races to a certain extent.
The Atlantean race. They had a very advanced industry and far superior to ours. Sophisticated devices such as the famous degravitator with which they could lift enormous volumes and raise them to great heights. They mastered magnetism in industrial and medical applications. When they degenerated, they established powerful black magic lodges with their respective temples, just as wars and defects infested the planet until an ecological imbalance occurred that produced great floods. The Empire of Atlantis. It covered not only the Atlantic continent, but also its surroundings in Europe, Asia, and America. Atlantean migrations. According to the Timaeus, he began a policy of expansion that led them to control the peoples of Libya as far as Egypt and Europe as far as Tyrrhenia. When they tried to subdue Greece and Egypt, they were defeated by the Athenians. They reached Canada, North, Central, and South America. To Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and Mongolia. There were also in Oceania and South Asia. The dispersion of the human race. After each geological cataclysm, it is not made from a single nucleus, but starts from 7 similar nuclei at the same time, according to Oriental teachings, and this being so, one of these Aryo Shah nuclei to be assigned to North America, from its center, the Sierra Nevada or country of the seven caves of the Ayer brothers, the Aryan brothers, from Ar, primitive fire. Migrations to Egypt. More than 20,000 years ago, before the imminent collapse of Atlantis, migrations began to the east. They reached Egypt and went beyond India. In this first wave, they built the Sphinx and the Giza pyramids and continued southeast. Subsequently, thousands of years later they returned from the southeast to Egypt, forming the civilization known as Ancient Egypt. Archaeology in Egypt. Egyptian sculptures over 20,000 years old. Migrations to Central America. More than 20,000 years ago, the Atlanteans had already migrated to Central America, known as the Toltecs, and were defeated by the natives. In times of splendor, many temples were built, which were reused by later native civilizations. Hundreds of years later, new Atlantean migrations returned and were welcomed by the surviving descendants of the Toltecs. Uxmal, Mexico. Huge sculptures of the Atlantes in Tula, Mexico. They are located on Pyramid B of the archaeological zone of Tula, state of Hidalgo. They measure more than 4.5 meters in height and are carved in overlapping basalt blocks. They represent Quetzalcoatl as the morning star, dressed as a Toltec warrior, with a butterfly pectoral, an atlotl, darts, a flint knife and a curved weapon that is very characteristic of the warrior representations of this culture. They had a temple roof. Tula, Mexico. Migrations to South America. More than 20,000 years ago, some Atlanteans came to South America, who were recognized as gods by the natives. In Colombia it is known as the Zipa, Bashwi, and Bacaca. Small groups of Atlanteans arrived in the northern region of Bolivia, who built monumental cities in Tiahuanaco. Tiahuanaco, Bolivia. The sculptors worked immense stones with an excellent craft. The metallurgists made plates for the iconographic bas-reliefs, managing to cover the portals of monuments with golden metals, which sparkled in the sun. The sages oriented the temples astronomically with amazing precision. Calasasaya Temple, in Tiahuanaco, Bolivia. All the temples in the city are oriented astronomically. Thus, in Calasasaya, Kala equals stone, Saya or Sayasta equals standing, or Temple of the Standing Stones. The changes of seasons and the 365-day solar year were accurately verified. On the wall of the temple there is an ear ritual probably based on religious festivities, very similar to the one existing in the 12,000-year-old Dolmen de Albarite, Cadiz. The oldest cities that we find in South America are Clap, Huari and Chan Chan. Puruchuco, Peru. Puruchuco would mean the land of the Porongo. The construction of this architectural complex comes from the Icma culture, before the Incas. Coaqui, Peru. It was a ceremonial center of the Nazca culture and was located in the valley of the Nazca River, 28 kilometers near the Nazca lines. Its name means place where the seers live. Until now, 34 constructions have been discovered inside the wall, among which are Great Pyramid, which is 150 meters long and 28 meters high, and of which 7 staggered levels have been discovered. It was the ceremonial center of the cult. Staggered Temple, of which a wall with inscriptions and friezes has been discovered, 5 meters high and 25 meters long. Mounds, 40 mounds with adobe buildings. Casma, the Great Temple of Sikkim, Peru. It is considered that it was the capital of an entire culture, which was called the Sikkim culture, prior to the Chavin. A distinctive feature of this monument is its veneered facade with flat-faced monoliths, on which are engraved figures in relief. Vishama, Carol, Peru. Each public building had an altar, with a central fire that reached high temperatures and underground conduits that channeled the energy of the wind. They had knowledge of fluid mechanics, according to the studies of physicists consulted. The Hypogeum. Considered as the only underground prehistoric temple in the world. Found on the island of Malta and rediscovered by pure chance in 1902 by some workers who were carrying out excavations. Underwater pyramids off Bermuda. The captured images show monumental constructions, including 4 giant pyramids, one of them made of glass, as well as a sphinx and several engraved monoliths. Underwater finds near Bimini. The Bimini Walls are strange rock formations that exist near the island of Bimini in the Bahamas at a depth of 10 meters. The 2 walls measure about 800 meters from northeast to southwest. Royal Portal in Jamaica. Vestiges of a sunken city in the Atlantic, stairs, walls, patios a few meters deep. Yonaguni, Japan. This pyramid-shaped monument is more than 14,000 years old, experts believe. Some believe that it is a vestige of a civilization that reached the Pacific. It was long lost and was called the Yomon people, who inhabited prehistoric Japan around 12,000 BC. The Patagonians. Further south the Thavatlai reached Patagonia and Antarctica, which at that time was not completely covered by ice. They measure more than 2.5 meters and their descendants lived until about 90 years ago. They were distinguished by their large feet of about 50 to 70 centimeters, hence their name. Eski Kerman, Crimea, Ukraine. City of more than 10,000 years old, more than 300 caves connected by streets that are worn by the passage of carriages. The bridges have disappeared, so the tracks are cut between mountains. Migrations to the Middle East. Some 15,000 years ago, migrations arrived in the Middle East and mixed with local native groups in Çatalhöyük, who were very ancient ethnic groups from the Turkic region. Megalithic constructions such as Göbekli Tepe arose in Turkey. Noah's Ark is said to have arrived in Turkey. Tibet. Tens of thousands of years ago there was a migration that reached the Himalayas, on one side of Tibet. There existed a wonderful kingdom Atlantis that was the result of an Aryan-Atlantean mixture. Migrations to India. Coming from other migrations to the east, they reached India by sea. There they mixed with the native population of Lemur origin and formed the Dravidian ethnic group. Technology, they built complex mechanisms, for example the planetary clock, which was used to calculate the planetary positions. Another great invention was the vimanas, which were air transport vehicles. They were for daily use. They transported even an animal. They were even used in wars. Footprints. Footprints of giants in India. The coast of the Gulf of Guinea. Facing the Gulf of Guinea, ancient temples have been found to have collapsed, with large halls and stairways guarded by bulls with a solar disk between their horns, in the Egyptian style. Sunken temple near Bali. Mangonia, Indonesia. Migrations to Europe. The Akkadians, finally dominated Atlantis, were in what is now Sardinia, Minorca, and Malta. In the end, they were declining populations, which even returned to living in caves. They practiced black magic and made human sacrifices and built many pagan temples in honor of their various gods. Minorca, Den Galm's Tower. Malt. The Hal Safliani Hypogeum, Valletta, and 7 megalithic temples that are some of the oldest freestanding structures in the world. Stonehenge. About 80,000 years ago, it was when a colony of initiates, which founded Stonehenge, landed on the British shores. Sardinia, Italy. Deposits of more than 8,500 years. Sassari, Sardinia, the giants of Mount Prima, Italy. Statues 2.50 meters high. More than 5,000 fragments were found, with 15 heads and 22 torsos. The Temple of Baalbek, located in Heliopolis, 800 kilometers from Beirut, is built on the ruins of an ancient temple of more than 12,000 years old, with immense stones of more than 700 tons each, dedicated to Baal, the god of rain, thunder and fertility, according to Semitic traditions. All migrations inherited the baptismal rites. In Babylonia and Egypt, the candidates for initiation into the mysteries were first baptized. Tertullian, in his treatise De Baptistismo, says that they were promised as a consequence the regeneration and the pardon of all their perjury. The Scandinavian nations baptized newborns, and if we go to Mexico and Peru, we will find the baptism of children as a solemn ceremony, consisting of sprinkling water, applying the sign of the cross, and reciting prayers to cleanse them of sin. Atlantean productivity. The island supplied in abundance all the materials needed by the arts. It also supported a large number of wild and domesticated animals, and many elephants were among them. All the animals had abundant grass, the same as those that lived in the swamps, in the lakes and in the rivers, as those that inhabited the mountains and plains, and the same the elephant as the others, despite its size and its size. In addition, all the perfumes that the earth produces today, wherever it may be, roots, herbs, plants, juices distilled from flowers or fruits, were produced and raised on the island. Agriculture. The experiments they carried out were the work of the agricultural schools of Atlantis, directed, of course, by superior masters. But the most notable case of the improvement of Atlantean agriculture was the evolution of the banana. In its primitive wild state, it was like an elongated melon with very little flesh and full of seeds, just like that fruit. The first avocados were fruits that were more than 3 feet long, and there are still some bushes in southern Florida in the U.S. Tomatoes were more similar to a cluster of fruits. They were quite large, about 20 centimeters. Chili. It was also very large, its fruits were about 30 centimeters long. Chili has been the nutritional base since ancient times. The oldest evidence found so far of seeds in Mexico refers to the Coxcatlan Cave, in the Tiahuanaco region, Puebla, where archaeologists discovered remains of chili from between 9,000 and 7,000 years BC. Large gourds over 8 feet in diameter, and even in parts of the southern U.S., are often found that size. The fruit of corn at first was more rounded, gigantic and of different colors. With the passage of time it was domesticated, giving it the elongated shape that we know now. Even within the same ear, grains of different colors could be found. Pineapple. This fruit was also quite strange in its shape, and it reached more than 2 meters in height. Some of its original forms are still found in Central America. Also, in Central and South America, there are still other giant foods, such as cabbage, carrots, cucumbers, cassava, etc., although there are also some that are poisonous, but with great medicinal power. Aztlan. Detail of the Bocharini Codex, which narrates the legendary journey of the Aztecs from Aztlan. Anonymous Aztec drawing from the 16th century that is preserved in the National Museum of Anthropology of Mexico. Codex. At least, of what was the Black initiation of the Mayas, Atlantean ancestors of the Egyptian priesthood and even of the Assyrian in the Great Yucatan Peninsula, the old mural paintings of those secret temples, today partly preserved in the so-called Codex of the Anahuac, or of the Holy Region of the Waters, the Atlantean Waters. Great Atlantean Masters. Quetzalcoatl, Boquica and Manco Capac, characters or colonies that civilized that world, came from Eastern Asia and had communication with the Tibetans, Tartars, and Samanios, and with the bearded masters of the islands of Yeso and Sakhalai. Decay of civilization. Decay of civilization. Like everything in history, civilizations have their cycle of splendor and decline. The main causes of his Atlantean decay were internal conflicts, extremely selfish and egocentric populations, who wanted to dominate people and nature, external invasions, confrontations with ancient peoples of lemur origin, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and subsidence. It is said that they modified the axis of rotation of the Earth, to maintain a spring climate all year round. This affected the stability of the Earth. Global climate change. Approximately 5,000 years ago, the Atlantean migrations had notorious prosperity throughout the world. A strong climatic change devastated most civilizations. Due to food shortages, temples and cities were abandoned, towns were exterminated, blaming the rulers and increasing human sacrifices. Great Oblivion. With the disappearance of Atlantis, great technical advances had already been forgotten, the black arts predominated and the wise were persecuted. It practically went back to a Neolithic age, as found in the ruins of Menorca and Malta, where pagan temples and caves predominated. In Turkey, people returned to living in caves. In Peru, Mexico, India, and Europe, old constructions were reused and ancient science was forgotten. The Golden City. An important settlement, it still remains hidden in the middle of the Amazon jungle. Many legends speak of El Dorado, full of wealth, but in reality, it was a priestly city, which preserved the most precious treasure, that is knowledge, just like Tibet, hidden in the most remote places for its protection. This collection process happened more than 7,000 years ago, before the great climate change that devastated many civilizations in the world.